In People versus Valdez, sabi ng Supreme Court, hindi pwede maging plain view kung nasa likod bahay. Why? To get a view of what is in the backyard, you have to enter the house first. And remember, the requirement is you must have the legal right to be where you are when you acquired the view. In People versus Compassion, the Supreme Court said, if you already conducted a surveillance operation, okay, that's not plain view. Remember the requirement? Inadvertent. If you conducted the surveillance, that's no longer inadvertent. Okay? So, ano dapat ginawa ng police? Well, nag-surveillance sila eh. Nakakahanap sila ng ebidensya, personal knowledge. They apply for a warrant. Don't put the law in your own hands. Arizona versus 6 is a U.S. case that shows you how important to the Americans, no? The American courts, the right to privacy. Because here, the police were called, 911 call, because may discharge, illegal discharge ng firearm. The caller, pinakita niya may butas dun sa kanyang floor. So must have come from under him. It was an apartment complex. So they went down the floor, the room, the unit rather, beneath the floor of the caller. So they knocked, they said, oh, can we investigate because there is a bullet hole there. That means it passed through here. We just want to check if it also passed through your floor. Kasi if not, then it came from this house, di ba? Pinapasok sila. So with consent. Now, when they were inside, they noticed that there were so many brand new stereo equipment in the apartment. Okay. This aroused their curiosity because 3 days before this incident, there was a robbery where an appliance store was robbed. So what did the police do? With one finger, he moved one of the stereo so that they can see at the back of the stereo the serial number. And then he called the station. Can you check the inventory of missing items in the robbery 3 days ago and confirm that these were the robbers, this was part of the loot. So they arrested, charged. Accused complained it was an illegal search. And the Supreme Court of the United States agreed with them. Sabi ng Supreme Court, even if it was not a full-blown search, it was still a search. And the search was unreasonable because there was no probable cause. In People versus Wang Zhenhua, here, Supreme Court said that when the police is chasing a person in hot pursuit, that person goes into his house, police follows, and they find in their plain view patently illegal objects. Can they take it? Supreme Court said yes. Why? Because they were in hot pursuit when they entered the house. They had legal authority to be where they were when they acquired the view. Okay? Because they were not searching for evidence, they just inadvertently came across it, an incriminating object, as they were in hot pursuit. Kaya what is the lesson? The lesson is if the police is running after you, okay, don't go into your house. Go to your enemy's house. Okay? People versus Bolasa, the Supreme Court invalidated a search and seizure. Allegedly, the police claimed that it was in their plain view. How did they acquire a view? They climbed the window and they peeped through the window. Supreme Court said, if you did that, okay, then you had no legal right where you were when you acquired the view. Hence, you cannot claim to have plain view of the patently illegal object. Okay. Class, ako may problema nga ako with the concept of plain view as used by our current policemen. No? You know, when I was a law student and when we will talk about buy-bust operations or drug raids and stuff like that, dati, before a buy-bust operation, there was always a test buy. And back then, when I was studying, I get that. Kasi can you identify marijuana with just plain sight? Ang alam ko, in all the cases I've read, I really don't know, I'm not a user, but in all the cases I've read, the court requires, for conviction, the testimony of the crime lab confirming this is marijuana or that this is shabu. To me, that means you cannot confirm it by mere eyesight. Right? Nakita ko, marijuana. How do you know that's not any other leaf? Okay? So I don't think plain view applies there. Kaya ang feeling ko, yung lahat ng buy-bust operation, yung lahat yan illegal if there is no test buy. Dati-dati kasi, the cases we studied, there was always a test buy. Oh, may suspected dealer, undercover will first purchase, bring it to the crime lab examines it, and says, yes, marijuana. O next buy ko ng buy-bust, pwede ko na siyang hulihin, caught in the act. Bakit? Alam ko na marijuana binibenta niya. Pero yung kita mo lang, plain view, how do you know? Lalo na shabu. I have not seen shabu class, but it is always described by the Supreme Court as a white powdery substance. Akong naisip ko, pag white powdery substance, tawas. So, how will the police know if it is shabu, di ba? If you charge them, you have to prove that the crime lab determined that it was shabu. So, I have a problem with them saying plain view ang drugs. Can you actually say it is patently illegal? Immediately apparent to you that it was illegal? I don't think so. Next exception, stop and frisk. Now, I want you to read the case of Terry versus Ohio because the stop and frisk doctrine, okay, was taken from the Terry versus Ohio case. Okay, that's why it is also known as the Terry search. Okay, what happened in Terry? What happened here is a police officer saw a man, a suspicious looking man. Why suspicious? In hot weather, he was wearing thick jacket. Okay? So parang ang init-init, ang kapal ng jacket mo. So his experience told him this is not normal. So he observed the guy. And he noticed that the guy was casing a convenience store. So he was going around the store, checking, casing it. So looking at the exits, looking at everything, ganyan. And so he decided that this guy is up to no good. So he approached the guy, introduced himself as a police officer, and asked him, what are you doing here? And when the initial answers of the guy did not satisfy him, and in fact made him feel threatened, he searched the outer clothing of the guy and found deadly weapon. During the case, questioned because it was a warrantless search, okay? But the U.S. Supreme Court said it was a valid stop and frisk situation. Okay? There were genuine reasons to believe that there is a threat to the life of a law enforcer and safety of the public, and therefore the search of an outer clothing was justified. Okay. The problem here is when we adopted the doctrine in the Philippines, the police will always use the case and say it is a stop and frisk situation. So let's look at some of the cases. No, in People versus Sulayaw, okay, there were reports daw of armed men. So the police went around looking for the complaint about armed men. Okay, and they saw this group that aroused their suspicion. So sabi nila, because suspicious yung conduct. Ano yung conduct? Tumakbo. Okay. So, what is suspicious about that? Baka mabaho lang yung police. Anyway, tumakbo, hinabol, hinuli. Ang sabi, stop and frisk. I mean, a few seconds, you have decided that something was afoot. I mean, that something was wrong. But the Supreme Court said it was a valid stop and frisk situation. Okay? When his companions fled, nagtakbuhan, that is already suspicious. In Manalili, okay, dito galit ako sa case na to because he was walking daw in a place that the police know na frequent daw ng mga addict. So what was the circumstance that justified the stop and frisk? The Supreme Court said, the police said, he had red eyes and susuray-suray daw maglakad. And on that basis, sabi ng Supreme Court, the police had every right to stop him and frisk him. Okay, of course, dito kasi every time you are searched, laging may droga. Because here in the Philippines, we hate drugs. Anyway, so valid stop and frisk. That I have a problem with that. Why? Because almost every night, you will find me with red eyes na susuray-suray. I mean, mamaya, ganun na itsura ko. That means the police can stop and frisk me. I think that is really a wrong interpretation of the stop and frisk doctrine. Okay. Buti na lang in Malacat, sabi ng Supreme Court. Okay, Supreme Court clarified. Indeed, no probable cause is required for a stop and frisk. Kasi, di ba probable cause, reasonable, prudent, and discreet man to believe that an offense has been committed. So, hindi probable cause. But there must be genuine reasons to believe that a person has a concealed weapon. Kasi yun naman talaga yung Terry search. Okay? Yun yung Terry search. Merong genuine belief because may ginawa ito. Okay? Na-threaten yung policeman that his life or the public safety may be in danger. Okay?